Hi, my name's Tim, amateur musician from London, and I'm taking this Berklee course in music just to help me improve my own musical output. Anyway, moving on. My background's engineering, so I've got a bit of a technical approach to music. So when I picked up the MOOC and this first assignment, I thought that looking at Timbre was probably my best bet to get into this. So let's give it a go. The video is meant to be a thought provoker on a huge subject. It doesn't include maths behind the music, so please just set your expectations accordingly, and we'll see if we can keep it interesting. I started off by thinking about definitions of timbre, and so where better to look than Wikipedia. The first definition I came across talked about tone colour and tone quality in psychoacoustics. Didn't really help me very much, but fortunately a slightly more simple version looked like this. So effectively, timbre is what makes a particular musical sound different from another one, even if they have the same pitch and loudness. Now that I sort of get. When we looked at the main course, you'll probably remember that we talked about, Loudon talked about the idea of acoustic waves being compressions and rarefactions in the air, and we used the idea of a simple waveform represented like I've got on this graph here. If we think about a simple musical note, we think of pitch, how high or low the note is. If you think of for a minute about your car engine when it's idling, when we've got low revolutions, so a low oscillation in the air, we get that low or almost beating sound, but as we accelerate, the engine seems to go up in pitch, and as the engine turns faster and faster. So a low musical note has a low frequency or number of waves per second, and a high note has a high number of waves per second. And we measure all of that frequency in hertz. So hertz, that's one of these cycles of compression and rarefaction per second. The bigger the number of hertz we have, the more number of compressions and rarefactions per second we have. Now when we hear an orchestra tuning up, they all play the same note, albeit that all the instruments tend to sound different, but they all play the same note, and that's typically an A above middle C, and that note has a frequency of 440 hertz, and we can represent this using a simple sinusoidal waveform on the graph that we have here. So what I'm going to do now is jump over to a digital audio workstation, or a DAW, and we'll actually hear what that sounds like. So here I've got Ableton Live. I think it's a pretty decent digital audio workstation, or DAW. I like to use it because when I'm playing, I play a bit of jazz and that kind of stuff, and I like to be able to improvise, and Ableton allows me to jump in and out of sections of songs as I go. Other DAWs are available. So I'm also using a synthesizer plugin. You'll see up on the right-hand side of the screen here, I've got this TAL synthesizer plugin. TAL range are really good, free, most of them are free at least, and tend to be modelled on those kind of 1980s Roland synths. So because my first synth was an SH101 back in 1982, I feel like I've grown up with these kind of devices. Search for TAL, Google them, and you'll get some tremendous plugins. I've set this TAL synth up. You can see up here I've got oscillator 1. That's the only oscillator I've got going, so that's going to be the one that generates the waveform, and I've set it up to a sine wave. Look down at the filter, and I've opened up the filter, so I've just got that sine wave pumping out. And what do I get? I get something that sounds a bit like this. Now, over on the left-hand side, I've got a spectrum analyzer in here. And this spectrum analyzer is showing this one clean frequency. If I put my mouse over the top of it, you'll see to the left 444 hertz. So roughly 440 hertz. That's my concert A. Now, no other frequencies are displayed on there. I simply have the one frequency. If I play an octave above, you'll see I get another peak on this graph. And now I'm looking at a value of about, well, it says 898, but roughly 880 is my number. So I've got an A above middle C and the octave above that. And so you can see how I've got two very distinct frequencies that are sitting out here. Now let's go back to the graphical representation in the presentation, and we'll see what that looks like. So imagine for a second you've picked up one of those little recorders or penny whistles you played as a kid. You blow gently on it, you get a pleasant note that comes out. The pitch of the note's set by the length of the pipe that you've got closed up with your fingers. And this length allows to the fundamental harmonic wave to be set up. So in my instance a second ago, that concert A. If you blow really hard on it, all of a sudden it jumps up an octave. And that's effectively what we saw on the screen in the door. So I have my green wave was my original note, and by playing an octave above, I get to double the frequency. It goes from 440 hertz up to 880 hertz, and that effectively allows me to fit two of these waveforms in the same space. So I've doubled the frequency, and we've gone up by one octave. So if we follow the same logic again, I can find out what my third harmonic is, and in this case, rather than fitting two waveforms in where I had my original one, I can fit now three waveforms in when I hit my original one, and all I'm doing is I'm multiplying that original 440 hertz by 3 to get up to 1320 hertz. So if we start to mix all of these waveforms in together, we can start to change the overall approach to the waveform that we get out. In this case, I've taken 13 waveforms, 13 harmonics. I've got the original green one, then I'm playing smaller amplitude, so roughly half the amplitude, but twice the frequency, and a little bit less again on the next harmonic up, the third harmonic, the fourth harmonic, and so on. And if I could put all of these together and I add the amplitude of all of these together, what I get is the black waveform out at the end. So although here I've got the effect of the original harmonic being on the up, I've got a negative chunk on the second harmonic, and that helps to pull down the average value of this black line. And we end up with something that we call a sawtooth wave. So by combining all of these harmonics together, with the first harmonic having the biggest amplitude, the second harmonic having the next amplitude down, third harmonic slightly smaller again, fourth harmonic slightly smaller again, we end up with the idea of a compiled waveform that we get this thing called a sawtooth wave. We can start putting all of these harmonics in different ways. So on the next example, I've got a square wave. Now the interesting thing with a square wave is you can see down the right hand side, I'm only using the first harmonic, the third harmonic, the fifth harmonic, the seventh harmonic. So effectively all the odd harmonics all the way down. And when I add these up, I start to get this really quite square looking wave. So what we can do now is use the idea of including these harmonics. I'm going to drop back to Ableton, to my DAW, and we'll have a look at how these pan out with the synthesizer. So coming back to Ableton, I'm going to look up at my synth here. I've got my sine wave today, and again I'll play that A, and you'll see how I get one peak on my spectrum analyzer. That's my peak at about 440 hertz. But I've got different options up here for waveforms. So let's click on that sawtooth wave, and let's see what happens now. So straight away you can hear the difference. You can hear it's a slightly kind of, it's got a slight grating to it, but you can now start to see I've got a peak here at 440 hertz. I've got another peak down here at 880-ish hertz, and another peak here, 1330-ish hertz. So you can see my first harmonic, my fundamental harmonic, second harmonic, third harmonic, fourth harmonic, fifth harmonic, sixth harmonic, and so on all the way down. And by blending in smaller amounts of the higher harmonics, I get this kind of raspy sound that we call a sawtooth wave. So I've changed just the way that this sound appears here by having the pure fundamental note, and here including all those other higher harmonics. But all of them are fundamentally anchored on the principle of that concert A at the base of it. So the pitch sounds the same, it's just the tonal quality sounds different. If I then go over to something we call the pulse wave here, this is my square wave. Now we get that sound, it's a little bit more kind of flute-like, and I'm using my fundamental, my first harmonic. I'm using the third harmonic, so you can see that's at roughly 1300 hertz. the fifth harmonic, the seventh, ninth, and so on. So we're using all the odd harmonics. So that sounds pretty different to the one that's got all the harmonics in. So if I only use those odd ones, I get a different sound. So all of a sudden, by combining all of these harmonics in slightly different combinations, I can alter the shape of the waveform, and so I can make it sound slightly different. So that's a pretty quick demonstration of how the clinical sounds of a modern analog synthesizer makes things sounds. But of course, when we think about natural instruments, there are many other features that distinguish their sounds. The harmonics can change through the length of a note as a trumpeter plays his note, and as the sound develops. And there's no reason to have full harmonics, those first, second, third, fourth harmonics. We can have partial harmonics too, that again give a bit more grit into the sound. And all of that leads to some pretty complex waveforms and sounds. So I thought, just as a final example, you can have a look at the spectrum response for a Yamaha DX7 here, just with a simple synthesized clavichord coming through. So take a look and see what this looks like for our waveform. Again, concert A. And so you can see, as the note triggers and then dies away, you can see different harmonics appearing and then disappearing. So in summary, timbre is what makes different instruments playing the same pitch and amplitude sound different. There are loads of different ways to make this happen, either by building up waveforms as I've shown here using different harmonics, or by altering the basic waveform using effects, maybe using filters, for example, and enhancing some frequencies and subduing others. Now, there's a stack of maths behind all of this. You can use your Fourier analysis to decompose waveforms and all that other good stuff. But to my mind, that's not as important as seeing and feeling the impact of changing those relative values of the full and partial harmonics. Now, I don't claim to be an expert. That's why I'm taking this Berklee College of Music MOOC. But hopefully you can see how I view this background topic at least, and I hope maybe it gives you something to think about. So I'd just like to say good luck with your assignments. Please feel free to leave me some constructive feedback. Oh, and if you're looking for some really good free plugins, do check out the TAL products at the link on the page here. So yeah, good luck.